And I think what people don't know is he really was a dad, so he could be completely hands-on and completely hands-off at the same time. Richard Pryor's daughter, Rain, grew up seeing things no child should see. Drugs, violence, and secrets filled her childhood home. When Jennifer Lee started telling stories about Richard and Marlon Brando, Rain knew she had to speak up. She accused Jennifer of manipulating her dying father and stealing millions from the family. But Rain's biggest revelation wasn't about money. It was about what really happened in those final years. Her explosive claims exposed a web of lies that went back decades. Richard Pryor was born on December 1, 1940, in Peoria, Illinois. His mother, Gertrude, sold her body. His father, Buck, threw punches, slung drinks, and ran women. Thus, Richard grew up in his grandmother Marie's brothel on North Washington Street. There, sex and secrets swirled. At 6, he peeked through keyholes. He saw his mother with Peoria's mayor in 1946. Orgies and brawls burned into his mind. By 1947, Marie ran to brothels and the famous Store nightclub. Meanwhile, half of Peoria's black ghetto scraped by without jobs. Racism choked the city. Consequently, at 7, nuns expelled him from Catholic school. They learned his home was a house of sin. He called it a minefield. Yet that chaos sparked his comedy. In 1946, his mother fled Buck's fists. As a result, 5-year-old Richard stayed with his cruel father. Pain carved him deep. Tragedy struck again. At 10, in 1950, a teenager abused him in an alley. He later bared this in prior convictions in 1995. Then, at 12, a priest molested him during catechism. Moreover, his grandmother's switch whippings left scars. In 1947, teachers noted his 100 IQ, but called him unstable. Still, these wounds fueled his humor. By 1974, his album, That Nigger's Crazy, stunned crowds. It turned pain into raw laughter. Decades later, in 1999, he faced his first abuser on a film set. They shook hands. Fear churned inside. Meanwhile, his mother left him at 10 to escape prostitution. But the judge gave Buck custody. Thus, betrayal cut deeper. School brought no relief. At 14 in 1954, he punched a teacher. Racial tension scorched Peoria. Expelled, he drifted through odd jobs. Then, on September 15, 1958, he joined the army. In West Germany, racism stung. In 1960, a white soldier mocked imitation of life. Enraged, Richard and black comrades stabbed the man with a switchblade. He aimed for the back. He missed. Briefly jailed, he took a dishonorable discharge on July 18, 1960. No court-martial. Once he cursed a colonel in Spanish. That rebellion, born of pain, drove his comedy. Yet drugs later loomed. Peoria's red light district forged him. From 1940, he watched fights at the famous Door. In 1945, drunken brawls spilled into streets. By the 1950s, North Washington Street vanished. Still, those memories became gold. In his 1979 live-in concert, he joked about peeping at 6. Profanity was his truth. Since Peoria's black folks faced 50% unemployment in 1950 and restaurant bans, his interracial taboo sharpened his edge. Stanford's 2015 archive with over 200 sources traced his youth. Hence, the brothel birthed his genius. In 1963, Richard Pryor was just 22 when he left Peoria, Illinois, and moved to New York City. He wanted to become a real comedian, so he jumped into the heart of the Greenwich Village comedy scene. He started performing at small clubs like the Bitter End and Cafwa, where he shared tiny rooms with other young comics. He tried to keep his act clean and friendly so he could please mostly white audiences. He even did impressions of Bill Cosby, just to survive. From 1965 to 1969, he got to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show 4 times, earning only $100 each time. That money barely paid for food. In 1964, things got so hard he had to wash dishes to keep going. Inside, he felt torn. He was acting safe just to fit in, and it made him feel fake. By 1966, while performing at the Village Gate, he met jazz musicians who respected him. But deep down, he still felt completely alone. In the mid-1960s, life became even harder. Richard was still struggling to pay bills and was only getting paid around $50 a night for shows at places like the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles. Around 1966, he started using cocaine, and by 1967, he had moved on to freebasing. That addiction changed everything. His energy on stage turned wild and chaotic. Some nights he was brilliant. Other nights it looked like he was falling apart. He began suffering from serious breakdowns. Between 1967 and 1970, the IRS came after him for over $20,000 in unpaid taxes. He was also caught up in legal trouble over relationships and violence. Even though the worst moment came years later in 1980, it was already building. That year, he set himself on fire, while high, suffering third-degree burns over half his body. He stayed in the hospital for 6 weeks, barely surviving. His wife, Jennifer, said the drugs had become like his lover. He kept relapsing even after the accident. In 1983, he finally started going to therapy and support groups. That pain started showing up in his jokes. He began doing voices of drug addicts, turning real sadness into comedy that made people laugh and cry at the same time. In 1968, he released his first comedy album. It didn't sell much at first, less than 10,000 copies, but it showed he was changing. He wasn't trying to be safe anymore. He started talking about race and poverty in ways that shocked people. One of his bits was called Super N******************, R, and it pushed every boundary. Just a year before that, in 1967, something inside him snapped. He was on stage in Las Vegas, in front of a packed crowd, with stars like Dean Martin watching. In the middle of his set, he stopped, looked around, and said, "What the F*** am I doing here?" Then he walked off. That moment ended his Vegas career, but it lit a fire in him. In 1969, his material started changing fast. He began writing angry, sharp routines about black life, fueled by the Black Power movement. His manager wanted him to stay clean and commercial, but Pryor fought back, even as he wrestled with drinking and self. That same year, he met Paul Mooney, and everything changed again. Mooney helped him write bits that were bold and honest. Together, they started telling the truth about being black in America. Mooney once joked that their act was like killing every white person, not literally, but because it made people face the truth. They worked together for the rest of Pryor's life, writing not just stand-up, but also TV shows like Sanford and Son in 1969. Their partnership led to his famous album, That Nigger's Crazy in 1974, which shocked America. It was full of harsh words, street stories, and jokes about police brutality. The album sold over 500,000 copies, went gold, and even won a Grammy. Pryor talked about growing up in his grandmother's brothel and how cops treated black men like targets. It became his therapy and a mirror for the country. After his Vegas breakdown, Pryor moved to Berkeley, California in 1970. He dove into radical politics and started hanging out with Huey Newton and Ishmael Reed. He kept using drugs and started performing at black clubs, where he earned around $200 or $300 per show. He released another album called Craps After Hours in 1970, full of wild drug-fueled stories. He started reading black history deeply, and after going to Africa in 1979, he made a decision he would never use the N-word again in his act. He also started working behind the scenes. In 1973, he was nominated for an Emmy for writing on Lily Tomlin's comedy special. That same year, he was writing for shows like Sanford and Son and The Flip Wilson Show. His words added bite and honesty to mainstream TV. In 1974, he helped write the film Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks. He was supposed to play the lead, but the insurance companies wouldn't allow it because of his drug problem. Still, his jokes stayed in the movie. It used the N-word over 17 times, but it was all to show how ugly racism really was. The movie came out in February 1974 and made nearly $120 million on just a $2.6 million budget. It got 3 Oscar nominations and made Pryor a quiet force behind a huge hit. In December 1975, Pryor hosted Saturday Night Live. The network was so nervous they added a 5-second delay for the first time ever. He did a sketch with Chevy Chase that turned into a battle of racial slurs. It was raw and dangerous and unforgettable. That night also featured sketches on police lineups and a monologue about drugs. Musical guest Gil Scott-Heron performed Johannesburg. The whole episode shook the country. Pryor made people laugh but also made them think. In December 1978, he performed 2 sold-out shows in Long Beach, California. Those shows became the film Richard Pryor, Live in Concert. Released in 1979, it was full of physical comedy, like pretending to have a heart attack or mimicking animals. But under the jokes were deep stories about abuse, fear, and racism. It made $15 million and was later added to the National Film Registry in 2003. That same year, he released a double album called Wanted, Live in Concert. It won another Grammy in 1979. On it, he talked about his childhood in Peoria, his grandmother's brothel, and even mentioned his multiple sclerosis, which he had just been diagnosed with in 1977. He turned all that pain into jokes people never forgot. In 1978, he shocked the world again with a movie called Blue Collar. It wasn't a comedy. He played a Detroit auto worker in a story about union corruption. The film came out in February 1978 and got amazing reviews. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Behind the scenes, Pryor fought with the other actors, and the tension made it even more real on screen. It didn't make huge money, but it became a favorite of directors like Spike Lee and Bruce Springsteen. Then came the fire. In 1980, while high on freebase cocaine, Richard Pryor set himself on fire. Flames covered more than half his body. He needed 140 stitches and weeks of skin grafts. In 1982, he came back with Live on the Sunset Strip, where he talked about that night in brutal detail. He joked about running down the street on fire, screaming. It was dark, but he made people laugh. That film opened in March 1982, made over $36 million, and won him another Grammy. In 1984, Pryor launched his own production company called Indigo Productions with a $40 million deal from Columbia Pictures. He wanted to help black filmmakers tell their own stories, but things went wrong. He fired the company's president and other black executives, which made the community angry. Still, in 1986, he released JoJo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, a film based on his own life. It showed his rise, his addictions, and the fire. It made $18 million and gave fans a raw look into everything he'd been through. In 1997, Richard Pryor appeared one last time on screen. He played a quiet, wheelchair-bound garage manager in a strange film called Lost Highway. The character felt real because by that time, Richard was already battling multiple sclerosis. His body was weak and shaking. He had to use a motorized scooter and every movement was a struggle. Still, when the cameras rolled, there was something about him that still shined. This would be the final time people saw him acting in a film. His health had already been failing for years. In 1990, he had a serious heart attack while visiting Australia. And in 1991, he had to go through triple bypass surgery. But even with all that, he still tried to work, still tried to stay involved. People said he looked tired, but his eyes still had that spark. In 1998, something powerful happened. Richard was chosen as the very first person to ever receive the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. It was meant to honor the way he made people laugh while also making them think about race and human pain. But when he arrived at the ceremony, the audience went quiet. He was in a wheelchair. His voice was almost gone. He tried to speak, but it was hard to understand him. He was only 57, but the disease had taken so much from him. Still, he smiled. The man who once lit up the stage was there, and even in silence, he was still deeply loved. After that, he rarely appeared in public. His last live shows had been in 1992. In 2000, a box set of his old work was released. In 2004, Comedy Central named him the greatest stand-up comedian of all time. A year later, he passed away. By the early 2000s, Richard couldn't perform on stage anymore. He couldn't even walk. But his voice still worked sometimes, and in 2001, he gave life to a cartoon character in The Proud Family. It was short, but it meant the world. In 2004, he lost his voice again. But in 2005, he surprised everyone by posting online just to prove he could still speak. On December 10, 2005, his heart gave out. He was 65. He had lived through so much. Fire had nearly killed him in 1980. He had survived 2 heart attacks, a disease that slowly destroyed his body, and a life filled with pain. Yet when he died, he still had a legacy worth $40 million. Statues were built in his honor. In 2015, one was placed in his hometown, Peoria. In 2022, he was added to the National Comedy Center. His early recordings from the 1970s were saved in a collection. People didn't just remember him. They studied him. They laughed. They cried. And they thanked him. But behind the laughter was chaos. Richard had been married 7 times to 5 women. The list included Shelley Bonus, Flynn Belaine, Jennifer Lee, Evelyn McGuire, and Deborah McGuire. He married some of them more than once. On New Year's Eve in 1978, while high on cocaine and filled with fear, he shot a gun at Deborah's Whitmer's. She ran from their home as bullets tore through the car. That wasn't the only violent moment. In 1986, he attacked Jennifer with a wine bottle during another jealous rage. Richard later admitted in his 1995 book, Pryor Convictions, that drugs made him act like a different person. Court records from 1979 and 1987 showed restraining orders. Women who loved him also feared him. He was charming, brilliant, and terrifying. He had 7 children with 6 women. Richard Jr. was born in 1961. Elizabeth came in 1967. Rain was born in 1969. Stephen in 1984. Franklin and Kelsey, both in 1987. One child remains unnamed, only mentioned in old memoirs. But even with all these kids, Richard was rarely around. During the 1970s, he performed more than 300 shows a year and earned $4 million annually. His daughter, Rain, later said she felt invisible, like her father was a ghost. In 1982, Richard Jr. sued him for $100,000 in unpaid support. In 2000, DNA tests confirmed paternity for children he had denied. His daughter Rain found him overdosed in 1974. Sometimes they reunited, like in 1995. But the hurt always lingered. One of the scariest moments happened in 1977. He was high on cocaine and pointed a gun at his wife, Pamela McGee's head. He screamed and waved the gun around. She ran and called the police. He was arrested, but she later dropped the charges. He even joked about it in his 1978 comedy show, saying he missed when he pulled the trigger. The audience laughed, but those who knew the truth were stunned. That same rage and drug use led to his attempt to take his own life in 1980 when he lit himself on fire. He burned over half his body. He nearly died. Richard also opened up about his sexuality. In the 1970s, he fell in love with a transgender woman named Mitch. They lived together, used drugs together, and had a real emotional connection. He wrote about her in his book. In 2018, his widow, Jennifer Lee, confirmed this, saying it was not a phase, but part of who he was. Quincy Jones even said that Richard had once been with Marlon Brando. Jennifer backed it up. She said Richard had written about men he loved in his diaries. Rain denied the Brando part but admitted the story about Mitrasha was true. The truth was Richard never hid from who he was. He spoke openly even when people weren't ready to hear it. In 1990, while playing golf, he collapsed from a heart attack. He was 49, he had smoked since the 1960s and was still doing cocaine, drinking heavily, and eating poorly. Doctors found his arteries were nearly closed. He needed major surgery. He joked that doctors found fried chicken in his veins. But the truth was heartbreaking. He had overdosed many times. In 1980, when he caught fire while freebasing cocaine, doctors had to use over 1 million units of skin grafts to save him. He spent years in and out of rehab, finally getting sober in 1991. By that time, his fortune had dropped to $1 million. He had made and lost it all, but he kept going. Even scarred and broken, he still stood in front of people and made them laugh. In February 2018, something surprising happened. Quincy Jones, one of the biggest music producers in the world, gave an interview at age 84, where he casually said that Marlon Brando once slept with Richard Pryor. He also mentioned James Baldwin and Marvin Gaye. Quincy said Brando would sleep with anything, even joked he'd sleep with a mailbox. He painted a picture of wild Hollywood parties in the 1970s filled with cocaine and quaaludes. This shocked people, especially since Richard Pryor had always been known for his jokes about race and personal pain, not his private life.